All right. So, just a little bit about me. So, I am now actually board certified in family medicine. I just graduated from ECU Health Rural Family Medicine program. I have signed to be a hospitalist, and I will also be doing hyperbaric medicine as well as wound care management. And I will also be serving as an attending physician for our outpatient residents. I'm really passionate about global health and will be involved in planning more of our global mission trips. And fun fact, I am a content creator because it's fun. All right. All right. So just a little bit. I've had some publications. Some of them include a publication in an interventional cardiology journal. One was in the Cleveland Clinic Journal of Medicine, and one was in the Journal of Quality. I'll share a little bit more about why I decided to talk about this in a little bit. Okay. So these are some of my publications. I have a lot more, not a lot more actually. I probably have like six in total, so it's not that much, but you can see them on my website. I've been lucky enough to be featured on our local ABC News in North Carolina, as well as Spectrum News, and was actually also able to be part of Andy M.D.s Beyond the Scope podcast. I don't know if some of you watch his YouTube channel, but he's fantastic, and you should definitely go and check him out. As you can see, it's been a very broad spectrum of things that I've been involved with, and it's just been very exciting. So just let's start from the beginning. So I am Canadian. I grew up in the suburbs of Toronto, Canada. I went to Bayview High School and I graduated from the International Baccalaureate program at the time. And then I decided that I wanted to go to University of Manitoba just because, as some of you may know, getting admission into Canadian medical schools is highly, highly competitive and going to, especially in the province of Ontario. So I was trying to optimize my chances and go to the University of Manitoba and try my luck there. Ultimately, I did not, I was not ready to leave Toronto and my family. So I moved back home. Back to the suburbs of Toronto. I was so homesick. It was just not for me. The snow was as high as my face, and I was like trying to get to class, and it was just no. So I moved back home and I decided that I did not want to commute at all. And I went to York University because it was literally like 10 minutes outside my house. And I was part of the Keenan Summer Research Scholarship Program at St. Michael's Hospital. We were involved in some research surrounding ischemic limb disease. And then during the time in university, I went home to Ahmedabad, India, and collaborated with a local hospital to raise awareness about menstruation and women's health. And I think that's when I really got passionate about global health. And, that's when the seed was placed. I was a member of a dance team throughout university. It was probably the only sport that I have any sort of ability to perform at. So it was a great team sport to be a part of. Took the MCAT, unfortunately, did not get into a Canadian medical school. And just because I didn't want to delay my dreams of being a doctor any longer, I decided to go the Caribbean route. So now we've gone to the Caribbean, did my basic sciences on St. Martin. It is a beautiful island. Half of it is actually Dutch and half of it's French. So it was a great experience. While I was there, I co-organized the first healthcare fair on the island, and it was so exciting. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And again, this just further developed my love for rural medicine and just connecting in small communities. And it was just so rewarding. So I decided that that's something that I really was passionate about. In between, and then I went to the United States and did my clinical rotations there. During that time, I did some research. I published 6 papers. I did my USMLE Step 1, Step 2, CS and CK. Unfortunately, did not match into any programs during the first ERAS match cycle. And then fun fact, COVID hit. So all my externships that I had planned, they all got canceled. It was really, really difficult. I decided to complete step 3 and I started a website, primarily just as a way to contribute in any way that I could during the pandemic, just because I wasn't able to actually be in the hospital. And the website went on to win a couple of awards, which was very exciting. The whole purpose of the website was basically to just consolidate all the resources that were being thrown out there for healthcare workers who are already super busy in the hospital. So I was trying to just do my part. So it was very exciting. Luckily, I got matched into the inaugural class of the ECU Health Rural Family Medicine program. And during that time, during my residency, I went on 2 medical mission trips, one to the Dominican Republic last year, which was very exciting. We got to work with some Haitian refugees, and we went up to the mountains to work with the mountain tribes of that region. And then earlier this year, I was able to go to Zambia and we went to the small village of Mwandi and got to work with the orphans and vulnerable children there and do physicals and things like that at several different schools. So it was very, very exciting. And I was able to be chief resident at my program and went on to win an award for rural advocacy. So that's a little bit about me and my journey. What is the point of this? The point of this is me telling you all this is the fact that I am a Canadian international medical graduate that has applied to the American match system. As a result of that, I'm already at more of a disadvantage. And so, as you can see, my journey wasn't traditional. I wasn't perfect. My application wasn't perfect by any means. But the point of this is the fact that you should never, ever, 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 ever give up. Nobody has it all figured out, and you know way more than you think you do. When things seem to get hard, make sure you ask for help. Ignore anybody and everybody that says that you can't do it. Ignore the fact any failures that you may have, learn from them, but just keep moving forward and try to be creative and implement the things that you have learned into moving on to the next step. Most importantly of all, you need to believe in yourself and be gentle with yourself. So, being that this is the International Summit, there are unique challenges that are definitely faced when you are part of an international applicant, whether you're applying to medical school, whether you're applying to residency, applying to anything. So that is the most important thing, especially if you're applying to the American healthcare system. It's difficult. Medicine itself is a difficult path, but that doesn't mean that you're not capable of it, okay? So how are we going to be the best applicant possible? So when you're applying as an international student, you already have a little bit of the deck stacked against you because you already have a lot of domestic applicants that don't require a visa and don't require that have already lived here that perhaps would have the opportunity to build connections that you may not have had the opportunity to, considering that you are not in the country. So in light of these difficulties, what is the best way to be the best applicant possible? So traditionally, so this goes without saying, and I'm sure that everybody knows this, it's basic. Scores matter. Your MCAT, your GPA, especially if you're applying to medical school. If you're a medical school applying to residency in the United States, that goes for steps, your USMLE Step 1, USMLE Step 2, USMLE Step 3, your GPA. All of that matters. Your score matters. Extracurriculars, they matter. That's why, as you can see from my earlier discussion, I did have research, I did have publications, I did volunteer work, I did participate in sports, if you count dance as sport, which I do. So those are things that, let's say, you should have. You're checking off the boxes. Okay, that's the basics. All right. Um, Now, what are the not basics? And these are also factors that play a huge role in determining who is a successful candidate and who isn't. And I'm saying this as someone who has been on the other side of the table when I'm interviewing medical students when I'm interviewing pre-med students for medical school applications, or if I am interviewing medical students for a potential position in our residency program. So being on both sides of the table, I'm here to tell you that there are some non-traditional factors, some external factors that also play a very significant role. Now, these factors include your personality. You can sort of showcase your personality through your personal statement, just generally having life experiences that you learned a great deal from that meant a lot to you, and your overall likability. Another factor, and this is quite large, and I think this is true basically anywhere in the world, is networking. Networking is very, very important, and being an active member of professional leadership organizations is extremely important. Um, you don't want to necessarily just write that you were a member of XYZ committees, but actually have an active role that you've played, because then that will result in more experiences that you can talk about and just be generally more interesting. So this is fantastic to add on top of the traditional factors that everybody already knows about. Like we mentioned in the previous slide, would be just like the scores and the extracurriculars and stuff. So now what if you're not traditional? Like what if you don't necessarily have the best scores? You may not necessarily have the best CV in the world. Things may not really be necessarily in your favor. Perhaps you had a life event that prevented you from doing the best that you possibly could on a particular exam. Does that mean that your dreams of being a doctor are over? No, absolutely not. And that is why I was talking about my personal failures earlier on. You cannot just be derailed by any failure and give up on your dreams. There are other ways that you can go about achieving this dream. And the biggest factor, the biggest bang for your buck, is networking. And let's get into that a little bit more. So, how do we optimize our chances? So, when it comes to networking, it can be difficult to network, especially being international. Being international makes it difficult for in-person networking, primarily when it comes to conferences and things like that. However, um, now being post-COVID, a lot of our society and medical academia has changed. A lot of forums are virtual. Case in point, right now, it's a great way to meet people and a great way to connect with other individuals. I have had applicants for our residency program that have reached out to me through social media, and there's just different ways to actually get to know people and form a genuine connection. So if you're international, nowadays, you're not really actually necessarily at a disadvantage. You can still network effectively and utilize social media sites and utilize things like LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram, anything that the organization that you're interested in has as a platform, you can use that to get to know people. So that is definitely how you can optimize your chances of successfully being a successful applicant. So how do we go about doing that? So I've noticed, and especially like at the level that I usually generally interview at, which is medical students applying into residency, and this is definitely applicable to essentially everyone. People don't generally do their homework beforehand. So what that means is that and these are things that are actually very important and things are not really talked about or really taught, especially in an international capacity. I know that these are some factors that were very well known to my colleagues that graduated from American medical school, but being that I went to the Caribbean and an international medical school, those were the support systems that we didn't have. That made this may also be the case for you at an undergraduate level, depending on which country you're from. And so especially when you're applying to the States, this would give you more of a benefit in making sure your application stands out. So when you reach out to people and you try to get involved in professional organizations, not only do you need to research the organization, but you also need to research the people in that organization. Let's say you're going to be attending a conference. If you're attending a conference, you need to look at the guest speakers, you need to look at the attendees, and there's usually a button, even for this, even for, let's say, this conference on the social media page for you can see that who's going to be the speakers. You can learn a lot about them just based on what their online presence is, what their interests are. And it's very important if you want to make a genuine connection with these individuals. You want to get to know them, what they like, what they don't like, as much as possible. Once you figure out what someone is passionate about, you can really form a meaningful connection. And forming a meaningful connection goes a very long way in being memorable and being noticed when it comes to applications. Your name will jump off the page if they remember a connection that they had with you and that was genuine and meaningful. One way to do that is not only, let's say, first aspect is you research the people. That's what we talked about. The second aspect is you need to reflect on your own personal journey. And that is where storytelling comes in. Every single person has a story. We are all human. Humans have a different lives. They have different life experiences, unique features. No one's life is smooth. Every single person has had some sort of hurdle or had some sort of struggle, and that is what makes you interesting. So really reflect on your journey and really learn about yourself and figure out what is your story that you want to share. Once you've reflected on these aspects, try and jot down your stories. So you want to organize your thoughts in a way that you can form a narrative that describes the points that you would like to highlight about yourself. So for instance, if I want to share a story about, if I want to write a story about, let's say, my life, the point that I'm trying to get across is the fact that it's okay to have difficulties, it's okay to have hurdles, and there are ways to be successful using those life experiences and using those to make meaningful connections and succeed. I would share my life experiences in a succinct, concise way so that they convey to the listener and the audience what I'm trying to say without directly listing it out, because that is so boring and no one's interested about that. The next thing after you've written your stories down, just to organize your thoughts, is that you want to share this story. Sometimes it's difficult to be vulnerable, but this is very, very important. Sharing your stories allows you to connect with another individual at a human level. And medicine is all about human connections, and you will have to be very good at it in order to be personable and in order to be able to connect with your patients. Connecting with patients leads to better patient rapport, leads to better healthcare management, and just leads to better outcomes in general. So this is a good way that you can use to reflect on your own journey and use that as a way not only to practice connecting with others so that when you become a doctor, you can connect well with your patients and really make a meaningful difference in their lives. All right. So write your story. What are some practical ways that we can write our story? And how do we become a good storyteller? Because we've all had those individuals that the story just goes on. Like, actually, what is a story? And people just start rambling. It's going everywhere. Like, what is the point that people are trying to get to? What's the point you're trying to make? These are some tips on how to be a good storyteller. Number one, and this is very, very important, you must know your audience. You must know your audience is so important. I am not going to be talking about complex physiologic pathways necessarily in the same way that I would to a medical student, in the same way that I would to a pre-med student, the same way that I would to a patient. You need to be able to understand your audience, what is your audience's motivations, what is important to your audience, and what kinds of things would your audience connect with? What is important to them? Ultimately, you want to be able to serve a purpose. That is our whole goal in medicine as well. We want to serve. And how do we serve that? Get to know your audience. Learn a little bit more about them, research them, figure out what it is that they like. Once you figure out what it is that they like, and you have a written story that you have, like summarizing your own life experiences, try to see how do they connect? How can you make the goal of your story align with the goal of the audience's desires and the audience's important factors, that something that's important to them? It's going to be an entire waste of time if your audience is interested in apples and you spent the entire time talking about how cucumbers were grown. You need to be able to make sure that there is a connection, that there is a synergy between the two so that you can have an optimal result. A good way to do it is use a hook. Once you figured it out, once you figured out something that overlaps, that you can share about your journey that connects with the audience's desires for more information, what you can start with is a hook. You want to have a hook to sort of capture the audience's attention. Something that may not make sense entirely. So it just allows the listener to just be like, wait, what is this about? Like, let me pay attention. So it really grabs the audience's attention. You want to be clear and concise. I cannot tell you the number of times where I've asked someone a question or they've been trying to tell me a story and it just like so long and winding. And ultimately, I don't even know what the point of the story was. Like, no clue. So you want to be clear and concise because a lot of people have very short attention spans. And that's just the truth, right? That's why TikTok and all these social media platforms are so successful, is because they have leveraged this attention span and utilized it to make it extremely popular. So we can utilize that in order to make ourselves likable and make ourselves engaging and interesting by knowing our audience and being clear, concise. And the best way to be clear, concise is to have a goal in your mind, a goal of the story, and just you want to make sure it's the right place at the right time. You got to read the room. If you see that someone's starting to zone off or they're not interested anymore, wrap it up. There's no point in just going on and on because you need to be engaging. Part of that is also body language. A good way to be engaging through body language is expressing enthusiasm, interest, passion, eye contact, confidence. Those ways that you can show that you really care about what you're saying and you really care about serving and helping the audience achieve their goals. Having that kind of body language automatically makes you more interesting and more engaging. And as a result of that, a better networker. And you always want to ask for feedback and you always want to practice and ask for feedback. We always ask for feedback because we're always trying to get better, and we always practice because sometimes it can be very difficult to be clear, concise, and precise. So those are the important tips to how to be a good storyteller. So one method of doing this, and this method is extremely effective, not only in helping clarify your goals in your story, but also when it comes to the interviews that you will inevitably have to do, medical school and residency and fellowship and job interviews. There are always going to be interviews, and when there are interviews, there are always stories to tell. The best way to tell a story and the best way to be clear, precise, and concise is to utilize the STAR method. This is a segment that I have taken from my YouTube series where I go into ways to be a very good interviewer. And there's more details here, but this is the crux, like this is the most important information here. If you want, you can go check that out and learn more about the more nitty-gritty details. But overall, the overarching thing is the STAR method. STAR. S. You want to focus 20% of the time. Okay. Sorry. I think someone was not on mute. Lovely singing voice though. So, um, you want to spend 20% of the time talking about the situation. So what you want to do is when you're preparing, you want to write down several life-changing moments, stories that have taken place that you have experienced, and write that down. Then you want to move on and spend 10% of the time talking about the actual problem, task, challenge, whatever it is that you have to address. After that, you spend 60%, majority of the time, talking about the actions that you took. And the purpose of this section is to highlight the skills that you want to show about yourself. There's nothing worse than someone going on and listing all the qualities that they have and failing to actually adequately show and describe the skills that they are saying that they have. And I'll give you an example. Results. So the last part is that you want to spend 10% of the time talking about is the positive outcomes of the actions that you took and what resulted in that. So let's say, for example, if we're setting the scene, and let's try to make this pertinent for when you're applying to medical school. A lot of times these interview questions tend to stay the same. So for the purposes of, let's say, applying to medical school, a common question is, what is one of your greatest strengths? So it is very easy, and a lot of applicants do this, is that my greatest strength is XYZ, and then just like insert whatever they think that their strength is. Not only is that boring and not engaging, it really actually doesn't tell me anything about you. It just tells me what you think that you are about. As someone who's interviewing you, what you want to do is you want to share a story. Let's say you're going to be talking about an example of something that occurred that allowed you to showcase that strength. So, for instance, let's say I would say one of my greatest strengths, and I'm internally preparing for this in my head, is one of my greatest strengths. And I know my goal is to express that my strength is I'm great with communication and interpersonal conflict management. So I know in my head that that is the skill that I want to highlight, but you cannot say that. So a situation that this actually happened, and this is one of my usual answers, is that, if I have an interviewer that asks me, what's your greatest strength? So I would say, I'd like to share a story. So when I was in medical school, we were doing rotations, there was an incident where we had medical students got to scrub into specific certain cases, and we had to decide amongst ourselves which case each individual medical student was going to scrub into. So there was three of us, and what ended up happening was one of the medical students that I was working with, she ended up going into all the more complex uh, incredible teaching opportunity cases. And as a result of that, me and the other medical student, we weren't able to get the same learning experience as a result. So the best thing that we wanted to do is that there was this conflict, and we wanted to make sure that we can communicate our conflict effectively and make sure that everyone has a good and fairly equitable learning opportunity during this surgical rotation. So what I did was that I took this medical student to the side and invited her out for coffee, and the three as well as the other medical student. So the three of us met up for coffee and just calmly and non-confrontationally described how we were feeling, in the sense that, we felt like the way that things were being distributed perhaps wasn't as even, and perhaps we can try another more effective, efficient method of doing so, by just basically going in order. And that way it's just a luck of the draw. And that way it would be more equitable. As a result of this open dialogue, we were able to figure out that, she had not meant it. It was not a malicious way of preventing us from achieving the same educational opportunities that she had. It was just that she was really passionate about surgery and wanted to optimize as many cases as she possibly could, and didn't realize the role that her actions were having on the rest of us. So, and now that she knew, we would implement this new system so that we would have a more equitable opportunity, an equitable set of opportunities during this rotation. So as you can see in this story, I am not saying, oh, I'm so good at negotiation. I'm so good at conflict management. You're not supposed to clearly say that, but in the story, by setting up the situation, describing the task, describing the actions that were taken and the results, I am conveying to the interviewer that I would be an effective an effective individual at conflict management. And this is obviously an important skill in medicine. It's an important skill in anything. No one wants to work or study or be around people who are just irritating and think that they know everything and don't provide fair opportunities to others. That is not a good culture to have. So naturally people want to pick other people to join their program that are good at conflict resolution. And that was just one example. You can, of course, utilize this to anything. It's applicable to anything. And you can also utilize this when you're creating your narrative about yourself and about your story, and just basically figure out, what am I trying to share? What kind of impression am I trying to make to the audience? How can my story help the audience? And then go through it in a systematic step-by-step method so that your story is engaging, enlightening, and actually is persuasive. So these are a couple of caveats. You always want to make sure you read the room. There have been some applicants that I have seen that don't necessarily do that, and they are just really, really not paying attention to the fact that what they're saying is not resonating with the interviewer. What they're saying is rubbing the interviewer the wrong way. You may want to pick up on those cues and realize that, maybe I need to throttle back what I'm saying, or perhaps just wrap up what I'm saying and move on to the next point. And a good way to move on to the next point is to have points in the first place. You want to make sure that you're organized, succinct, and precise. And that comes with preparation. And I cannot emphasize this enough. The last point is to be genuine. People can tell if you're faking it. People can tell if you're lying. And you want to just avoid that. In order to form a genuine connection, you have to be genuine, and you have to be engaging in a meaningful and true manner, and be focused on the listener, and want to just make sure that you're actively listening. And that goes a very, very long way. A lot of times what I've seen is that we have interviewees that come in that have prepared extensively. 10 out of 10, fantastic, great job. However, what ends up happening is that once they have prepared too much, it sounds a little mechanical. And when it starts a little mechanical, it comes off as disingenuous. I know that that is something that happens when, you're nervous. I've been there too. We all have. That's understandable, but that's why you want to practice and make sure you ask for feedback and want to make sure that you're focused on the listener. Because if the listener looks like they're starting to zone off, maybe throw in something a little bit more engaging, wrap it up, move on. And perhaps equally or more importantly, do not use this as an okay. The other thing is do not use this as an opportunity to have a little pity party. No one is interested in your excuses. And excuses are things, it's okay. We all have challenges, we all have struggles. Life is not easy for everybody, but a lot of times it's very disheartening to necessarily just listen to someone complain. You want to make sure that when you talk about your struggles or whatever difficulties that you've had, you do so in a positive, uplifting manner and discuss the things that you have learned from it or how you grew from it. You always want to make sure that the conversation and the points that you have are very positive, lighthearted, and meaningful. At the same token, in the other side of the coin, do not use this opportunity to brag and or suck up. Brag or suck up to the listener, which often, like let's say for example, it's the interviewer. It gets so tedious. No one likes someone who constantly brags. You're in medicine. Obviously, you're going to be accomplished. You're obviously going to have publications. Obviously, that's a given. You want to make sure that you stay humble. And while you discuss your accomplishments and be proud of your accomplishments, you want to make sure that you do so in a humble way and not in a way that comes off condescending, because that is a huge turnoff for interviewers. And it just makes you less likable. So while you don't want to underplay your achievements, you do want to convey them in your story in a very humble and appreciative sort of way. And if you can tell, I have the repetition is the key to success. Do not be long-winded. You want to make sure that you follow the percentage. If you know that you're trying to keep your answer to perhaps a couple of minutes, try to break down those minutes in the proportions that we discussed in the earlier slide. And that way you have a very concise and meaningful answer. Okay, and where can you use this technique? So this is a great way. I know we used the STAR method and we really emphasize its utility when it comes to interviewing. And it really is. That's, I believe, where it was originally developed. It was originally developed as an interview technique, and it's very, very effective. Uh, but it can also be a great way to learn about yourself. When you're doing this, it's a process of self-reflection. It's a process of journaling. Journaling and self-reflection have shown there's been plenty of studies that have shown that it leads to greater empathy, greater human connection, and you need those soft skills, especially when you're going into medicine. There's a science of medicine, which I'm sure you guys are all fantastic at, but there is an art of medicine, which is also extremely important in order to be an effective physician, clinician, and actually making a meaningful change in your patients' lives. You need to be able to cultivate that, grow that, and make that connection. And one way to do that is through learning more about yourself, learning more about other people. And through doing this and through forming these connections, you will begin to notice that you have a network that you can utilize in order to meet people and get to know other people that are pursuing similar interests and perhaps can help you in your goals while you also help them achieve theirs. So you always want to ask, what can you do for someone else while also keeping in mind your goals? So that is a good way to do so. So thank you so much for your time. I hope this was very helpful. And if you guys have any questions, let me know. We have about 15 minutes.
Yes, thank you so much. That was a very, very insightful presentation. And let me start with some of the questions from the chat that were coming through. One of the questions from Bibi is, could you let us know, share some resources on how to publish blogs, articles, and stories, and how to practice that.
To share resources on how to
It's just, yeah, platforms, websites, research to have our own blog or publish our own articles slash stories. I think maybe talking about like the publication process that you went through as you published papers.
Okay, yeah, so we can so I have yet to find a resource, and I understand where you're coming from because I also went through this during my very first publication. It was really frustrating that I didn't really have a good place to begin. So I actually don't really have a good resource on that I can share on like which publications to look for. I mean, it's a great idea for me to make a YouTube video for you guys in the future if that's something that you're interested in, because it is actually very complex. I do have a YouTube video on conducting research. I believe it's one of my earlier videos, so you can find that on my channel, but I don't know any resources. And the reason for that is partly because medicine is so broad and the resources really vary by specialty and the topics that you're interested in. And a good way to get to know those is to be a part of the professional organizations that you're interested in pursuing research. And once you're a member of those organizations and once you've surrounded yourself with those people, they will oftentimes tell you what journals are high impact and important within the field. And that is truly where I got majority of my information. So for example, like my first published journal was an interventional cardiology journal. I, being a medical student, obviously, I don't know much about interventional cardiology. Obviously, I'm third, fourth year medical student. So, but the way that I found out about it and the way that I got involved with it is constantly talking to my attendings and my fellows and asking if there was any interesting cases that they were working on and what kind of journals are prominent within the field. And that's true. That's a good way to get started. At least when you get started, you can have an idea of what are some good journals that have good high impact factors. And when you go to their website for that individual journal, they oftentimes will tell you the structure and the criteria. I hope that was helpful. I don't know if that was entirely a helpful answer. Sorry.
No, perfect, perfect response. I'll take one more question from the chat before I take hands. When did you start research? What was your journey like? Was it an undergrad or was it when you were in medical school?
Undergrad. So undergrad, I was part of the Keenan Research Scholarship Program at St. Michael's Hospital. So again, this where it comes back to networking, and this is full transparency. And the reason I say this is because people often think that you have to have all these connections. I'm the only doctor in my family. I don't have any connections. I didn't have any family members that were doctors that could help me. And that was really difficult. So what ended up happening is that my mom talked to my grandfather's cardiologist and expressed that, I was really interested in research. And that's how I got involved because that cardiologist was doing research, which goes back to always connect with people and get to know everybody. You never know what it may lead to. So being part of that Keenan Research Scholarship got me involved in his research, which was surrounding ischemic cardiac surgery, well, primarily ischemic limb disease. There was work in animal models where they were trying to essentially cut off one of the arteries and then see what kind of markers would be elevated as a result of that. So that was my first foray into research. And then while in medical school, because I went to a Caribbean medical school, my I didn't have many opportunities available to me to do research while in basic sciences. In clinical sciences, I did a lot of research. I was at the Detroit Medical Center, again, involved in cardiology. A lot of, as you can see, a lot of the stuff that I have been doing is cardiology. And primarily that's not because I wanted to do cardiology, but because number one, cardiology is a major part of absolute like primary care, which is what I was interested in. And number two, it was something that was, at least in my experience, a place where they were doing research and something that I can get involved in. So I was talking to our fellows and discussing with them like my interest. And once you just express your interest, people will bring you along. So that's how I got involved in research in medical school. After that, I had to move. So I got involved at the University of Michigan, involved in oncology research, primarily looking at markers in breast cancer. So those are some ways that I got involved with research. And unfortunately, nowadays, as a clinician, that's not going to be part of my practice. I just find that I personally enjoy other things more.
Perfect. All right, I'll take a hand from Rita.
Okay, can you hear me right?
Yes, hello.
Hello. Firstly, actually, I have two questions, okay?
Mhm.
As I'm a student in high school, what should I do to reach a medical college, or what should I focus on? The second one, should I take MCAT exam to be a medical student?
Okay, so I can speak to this the system in the States. Um, so as a high school student, the best things that you can do genuinely is focus on your scores. You want to focus on your scores. You want to get involved with the extracurriculars, mainly the stuff that I was talking about earlier in terms of the traditional factors. Scores, that includes GPA, whatever exams that you may have in your country, as well as extracurriculars. Medicine is very much a team sport. You want to make sure that it's conveyed that you perform well in teams. At least that's the case in the United States and Canada. So that's why there's an emphasis on sports. There's an emphasis on some sort of team-based activity. You want to show that you have the desire to give back. Some sort of volunteerism is definitely important. Um, and ideally, you want to make sure it's something that you're passionate about, that you can use to relate to medicine. A lot of times people will just say they shadowed in a hospital or they worked with a doctor, and that's great too. But that's something that almost everybody tends to have. So if you want to be unique, try to also participate in something that's perhaps a little bit different. If you're applying to, I would say, a Canadian or American, basically a North American medical school, I would say you have to take the MCAT. Also, let's say if you choose to go the Caribbean route, there are some medical schools in the Caribbean, and those ones do require MCATs. And the ones that don't require MCATs tend to be a little bit more difficult to match successfully into a residency program. So that's my way of saying yes, take the MCAT, especially if you're planning to go into the North American system.
Great.
Okay, for now, should I
Rita,
study
we'll
for
keep
medical?
Rita, we'll keep it at one question per participant just because we have so many hands. So we'll share contact information so you can reach out
Yeah, you
after.
can definitely reach out
Yeah,
to
I'm
me.
I'm so sorry for that.
No, no worries. The next person, Amir. Mm,
Um, Hello, can you hear me?
yes.
Hi.
Uh, so I wanted to ask you about the grading system. You know that grading system in developing nations or our countries is so different than in America because in America they have CPA, but our grading system is mostly is like a 20 out of 20. And the average is 10 out of 20. But in the grading system of America's EPA, the average is 3.0. So it's so different. And the equivalent also may seem like even if you get like a good score, it would look an average because the grading systems are so different. So would they consider our score from our grading system, or would they like see the grading system based on the GPA, the American GPA, of course?
Well, generally speaking, if you're coming from an international school, um, because that's not, like you said, it's going to be different. And just a heads up, it's also different across the United States and Canada, depending on what school you're from, yada, yada, yada. So a lot of times at that point, they will rely very heavily on standardized tests and more than your GPA.
Even like the standardized test, like SITS and oh,
Sorry?
SITS.
The standardized exams for, so are you saying the ITS?
Yeah.
So, I think like it's going to depend on where you apply. So if you apply to the States, I'm not sure what the ITS is, quite frankly, so I'll be perfectly honest with you. But generally, whenever we look at international applicants, we look at standardized exams that are available in the United States. And let's say if there's like IIT or TOEFL or something like that, then there's a general score cutoff. But aside from those ones, the standardized tests primarily are the American or Canadian standardized tests.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
The next question we'll just take the other hands. Malik? Oh, I think he put his hand down. Hems?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. Yes.
Hi. I wanted to say, first of all, your talk was really, really lovely. So thank you for that.
Oh,
And
thank
I wanted to
you.
ask, like, what about your social media platforms? Like you mentioned that you have a YouTube channel. Will
Mhm.
this be linked to us later, or if you could tell me now, because I do want to check it out.
Oh, okay. There you go. There's my contact information. I guess I should just leave that up. So it's
Yeah.
just my name. That's all.
Okay. Thank you. That's about it. Thank you for the lovely speech talk again. It was really nice.
Thanks. I'm glad it was helpful.
We'll take two more questions. Yasin?
Yeah, am I audible?
Hi.
Hi. Um, I just wanted to thank you, Doctor, because the interview was really nice and I benefited a lot from it.
Oh, I'm glad. I'm
Uh,
glad.
yeah, it was really nice. I wanted to ask you about something. You talked about showcasing to interviewers, skills that you might think they would like
Mhm.
conflict
Resolution.
management, stuff like that. I wanted to ask you in the context of a high school student.
Mhm.
Can you give some tips onto how to develop or how to, develop these skills that would help you in that process, like the interview process and uni admission process?
Honestly, this is applicable to like anybody. So even in high school, like in high school, there's so much conflict. Like
Mm.
teenagers are notoriously conflict-ridden individuals. I'm sure that there are plenty of conflicts that you can think of that happen in between just anybody. Let's say if you're part of a club at school and okay, so I'm getting an example from when I was in high school. So when I was in high school, we had prefects. I was a prefect, and then there was another prefect member that I had conflict with because we were supposed to work jointly on a task, and she didn't do her portion of what she was supposed to do. So that's an example of a conflict. And then, you can go on to describe how you went on to resolve that conflict. High schoolers, you guys have to do a lot of group projects. That's another way to talk about conflict resolution. So you already have those skills, and just being alive and being a member like of society and school, like you are doing a lot more conflict resolution than perhaps you realize.
I thank you. That makes sense.
Yeah.
To be respectful of your time, we'll just direct all questions to your email. The rest of the questions, if people ask, is that okay if they email you?
Yes. Okay. I would be more than happy to have you guys email me. Great ways to contact me are through my Gmail that's written here. again, I have my Instagram that's right here as well. I do look at my DMs quite frequently, as well as my YouTube channel. If you did find that the interview stuff was helpful, I do have more in-depth videos that are available tackling imposter syndrome, basically things that are applicable at every single stage of your journey. And if there's any more questions that I can answer, feel free to reach out to me and I will get back to you.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Shaw. We had an amazing, I learned so much from your session, and I know I've seen us all the chat pretty much exploding on how thankful they are for you to be here today.
Oh,
We've
thank
been
you.
we want to give you a round of applause, a Zoom round of applause. So if everyone can go to the reactions and give Dr. Shaw a Zoom round of applause, that would be amazing. And again, we'll share all contact info also on Slack and on our program schedule. So if you don't get it from here, we will share that to you. We have that information.
Okay. Sounds good. Thank you. Thanks for having me, guys.
Yes, thank you so much for joining today.
Okay.
All right, then I will we'll move on to the next portion of the workshop. 1 second. All right. Okay. Well, thank you everyone for your amazing questions. I see a ton of questions in the chat and some direct messages. So again, I direct you to email her, check out her YouTube channel, ton of amazing resources and vlogs about her journey, as well as I think she recently posted something around her she posted something, a YouTube video on some amazing topics that I was listening to before today's session. So I would definitely check her out. She vlogs amazing. So yeah, I will hand over the mic to Davina for her neuroscience workshop today.
Awesome. Okay. Are we doing our attendance poll as well?
Yes, I almost forget to send that out. Let me send that attendance poll out now. I have that ready.
Perfect. Yeah, I'll give everyone a minute to answer it and then we can get into the workshop.
Hi, Davina.
Hi.
Yeah, you sent the poll out. I'll
Is it only one ball or there's another?
There'll be another one at the end of the session after my workshop.
Can I ask a quick
I
question?
didn't hear you.
There'll be one more at the end of the workshop. And again, if you're not able to see the poll, please message work on Slack right now. If anyone has any questions about whether or not we're announcing our top debaters today, we will be. It's one of the first slides in my workshop for today. Nada, do you have one question before I jump into my workshop? Okay. All right, let me see how many people have responded. Seems like mostly everyone has responded to the poll. I'll give everyone like 1 more minute to respond or message work. And then remember that in order to be counted for attendance for the entire session, you have to be here for the first hour, answer the poll, and then the second hour. Yes, the poll was pretty easy too. Hopefully everyone got it right. Okay, I see a couple of hands, but if you have any questions related to the poll or to attendance, you can drop them in the chat and then Ahmad will try to answer those while I'm presenting my workshop. Okay. Nada, do you have a question?
Yeah, I want to ask about something like I'm a student at grade 12, so I don't have opportunity to develop my GPA. What should I do?
So are you talking about like developing your GPA for med school or for college?
No, for the college, my country don't have medical school. For yeah, for the college.
So, I have a couple things that might help. I don't know if I have enough time to share all of them with you right now. So if you want to, you can message me on Slack the same question, and then I can share some resources for you for what you can do where you are to potentially balance out your GPA with some extracurriculars, do some standardized tests, and some other things. So if you message me on Slack, I can share some of those resources with you. Okay. I think those are all the questions I'm going to take for now. And what I'll do is I'll share the link to my workshop in Slack right now. So, or sorry, I'll send it on Zoom. We're working on the Arabic translation for this workshop. So if you need this workshop translated in Arabic, we have some volunteers working on it already. We just need a little bit of time to get everything translated properly. And then as soon as I have it, I'll send it out to everybody. But I have a link to the presentation that I'm sharing in the chat now. Please try to follow along with me, and you can download it, you can annotate it, whatever you need to do. But yeah, I'll go ahead and get started. Am I good to go?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So hopefully everyone's opening up the workshop, downloading it if they want to. And I'll go ahead and get started. I'll also keep an eye on the chat at any point if people have questions. Okay, everyone can see my screen okay? Am I good?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Beautiful. Okay, so good morning or good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our neuroscience workshop. I love teaching this workshop every year because I actually just graduated with my bachelor's in science with a focus in neuroscience. That was what I majored in. I've always really, really loved neuroscience. I think it's one of the, I'm kind of biased, but I think it's one of the coolest sciences out there. I think the science of our nervous system and our brain is really, really cool, and we're always learning so much more about it. And I'm really glad that I get to be here to share some of this information with you. And hopefully, even if you don't want to major in neuroscience after this, you find it exciting or a little bit interesting, or you learn something new. So I know we said we would announce our top debaters first, so that's what we'll do right now. And this is just for our international participants. So congratulations to everyone whose name's on the screen right now. These were all of our top debaters from all of our different breakout rooms. So congratulations to everyone that's on this list. And also congratulations to everyone that just participated in general. There were great discussions that we saw going on, and we're really happy that we had the debate this year. And we hope that the conversation went well for everyone and that you had a good time. So yes, congratulations, everyone. Good job. Okay, so now we'll talk about our nervous system. So does anybody know what our nervous system is made up of? You can raise your hand, you can type it in the chat. Like what makes up our nervous system? Nirvana?
It's like the brain, the spinal cord, and all the small neurons connecting all our body.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's our brain, it's our spinal cord. There are a couple other things as well. Does anyone have anything else they want to add on to that? Maybe Milad?
Yes, there is the central nervous system consists of spinal cord and the brain, and there is the BNS, as is the neurons all over our body.
Yes, beautiful. So we have our central, we have our peripheral nervous system. We've got the major components being our brain, our spinal cord, and also something that gets a little bit forgotten sometimes is that we also have our peripheral nerves. So yes, we have our brain and we have our spinal cord, but we also have peripheral nerves that branch out from your spinal cord that innervate your body. So for example, as you can see, my hands are moving right now. My hands are moving because of these peripheral nerves that extend from my spinal cord and innervate my hand muscles that essentially allow them to move. We also have our sensory receptors, which are really important. If you've ever touched a really, really hot stove and then you've like jumped back because it was really hot, it's actually a reflex, all thanks to your nervous system that sends that sensory information to your spinal cord and then right back out to your finger so you can immediately jump back and not burn yourself too badly. Yeah, these are some of our pretty major components of our nervous system. And this is what it looks like here. So as you can see, this is a diagram of our nervous system. You can see your brain at the top, and then your spinal cord is this column right here in blue that's extending all the way down. Let me see if I can do a laser pointer, but I'm not sure I can. But yeah, so you have your brain here, you have your spinal cord that runs all the way down, and then you have all of these nerves that branch off of your spinal cord. And those are also really, really important. So I've talked to you a little bit about what makes up our nervous system, but can anyone share with me why our nervous system is so important? What does it do why is it essential? Why do we need it? Would we be okay if we didn't have a nervous system? Big God, do you want to share? Big God?
Yes, the nervous system is important for regulating our vital processes like heartbeats, like breathing. Also, it is important for memory. It's important for the learning of walking and so many things. It is a regulatory system.
Yeah, exactly. Everything you said was correct. It's really important in regulation, and it's important in all of these processes that we sometimes take for granted too. Rada, did you want to share anything additionally? Because there are lots of things that our nervous system does. So I'm sure we can
Yeah,
go.
I want to tell you that we can, by nervous system, control everything in our systems, such like brain. We have a neuron in the brain. We can affect everything in it, and also it can regulate everything in our life.
Yeah, exactly. I'll go to Noor and then Anna, and then we'll move on to the next part. So Noor, anything else you wanted to share?
Can I hear?
I can hear. Yes.
It also reacts to change both outside and inside the body. The nervous system helps all of the parts of the body to can't
Yeah,
reach.
it helps us. It helps us regulate everything. Good job. And then Anna, did you want to share anything?
Yeah, I just want to say that the nervous system literally enables the whole body to work. So everything that we do passes through the system. So it's like the manager. And if we don't have it, we just we have our other systems, but they don't properly work.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a good metaphor to think of our nervous system as the manager of our body, because for most of the things that our body needs to do, our nervous system is the one that's mostly in control of that. It's not true of everything, and we'll touch on that briefly later. But yes, okay. So I'm lowering them, and then we'll move on to our next part. Reminder to keep your mics on mute unless you're being called on. Thank you so much. Give me one sec. Okay. So yes, those are all some really important reasons why our nervous system is so important. Some other functions of our nervous system, some of you mentioned this, it regulates and controls our ability to move, to breathe, to communicate, to think, to have a stable body temperature, to communicate with other body systems. So the nervous system is just one of many body systems. We also have our muscular system, our cardiovascular system, our integumentary system, and our endocrine system, our digestive system, and our brain and our spinal cord and our central nervous system is communicating with all of this to help keep our body running. And some other fun facts about the nervous system, or our brain specifically, is that our brain contains nearly 86 billion neurons. It helps hold us together. And these neurons are they're not the most abundant cells in our brain, but they are arguably the most important because they're the cells that communicate with one another and send out all of this information that helps us speak, helps us make decisions, helps our body function. And some other really cool things about our nervous system is that it's what allows us to learn and change. So whenever you create something new like art or music, your neurons actually rewire themselves because of this change. So your brain is really highly dependent on your environment and what you're doing, what you're experiencing. It also helps you how to figure out, how to get to your new school. You create new neural networks and neural mapping systems when you explore new areas, when you create new routines. It's also really critical in early childhood development. We have these things called critical periods where at a certain point in time, a child should be able to do this, like walk or be able to tell their parents apart from strangers or recognize specific colors or shapes. And those neurons and the fact that our neurons are talking to one another help essentially make that possible. So I know somebody already mentioned this, but does anyone want to tell me what the difference is between our central nervous system and our peripheral nervous system is? You can tell me anatomically or function, like what the functional differences are. So Dina, did you want to share?
Yeah, so CNS contains our spinal cord and brain, but the PNS is the rest of our body, I can say. And both of them PNS contains neurons.
So our PNS, yeah, definitely. So our PNS definitely has it has our peripheral nerves and our sensory receptors, and then our central nervous system has our brain and our spinal cord. So good job. Yumna, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
Yeah, like what you said now, CNS refers to central nervous system and PNS refers to peripheral nervous system. CNS consists of brain and spinal cord. PNS consists of peripheral nerves which connect CNS with the other parts of our body. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, no, that's great. Okay. I know a lot of people have their hands up, so I have a lot of other questions in this workshop as well. So if you haven't gotten a chance to speak up yet, no worries. So this is a diagram showing us what the differences between our central and peripheral nervous system is. So you can more clearly see what the central nervous system is made up of. So our brain and our spinal cord, and then our peripheral nerves as well. So our CNS is our integration and our command center. So there's our brain and our spinal cord, and that's what's making our decisions for our body. It's receiving all the sensory input from the world around us. It's making decisions about it. It's gathering all that information, sorting it, processing it, and then making decisions about it. Our peripheral nervous system is what's carrying messages. So think of it as our relay system from the spinal cord and the brain. So our peripheral nervous system is gathering the information from the world and bringing it to our central nervous system so that it can be processed, and then relaying the commands out back to our sensory nerves and our muscles and our glands and things like that. So this is a little flow chart of what our nervous system is essentially comprised of. So in our peripheral nervous system that's carrying messages to and from the CNS, kind of like our messenger system, we have two different subdivisions. One is our somatic nervous system, which is controlling our voluntary muscle contractions. So like the way I'm moving my hands right now, that's voluntary. I'm trying to do that. And then we also have our autonomic nervous system. So this is controlling involuntary body functions. So if you've ever had to public speak or if you've ever been in danger, both really scary situations, you might have experienced your heart rate quickening, or that you might start sweating, or you might start feeling really nervous. So this is all thanks to your sympathetic nervous system. It's essentially arousing your body to expend energy, and it's putting you in a kind of fight or flight state. And that's all thanks to this process that you can't even control. It's all because of your autonomic nervous system. We also have our parasympathetic nervous system, which essentially calms the body down. So think of what happens after you eat a meal. Your parasympathetic nervous system is helping you rest and digest that food. Okay, so next up, we're going to be talking about different parts of our nervous system up close. So our brain can be divided into functionalized segments or lobes, and these lobes each have a different function. They all communicate with one another, but they do have different functions. Can anybody tell me a lobe of the brain? Just what it might be. You can raise your hand or you can put it in the chat. Just what one lobe of the brain might be. Rauda?
Okay, the lobes of the brain for divided in three parts for brain. This first cerebrum and left hemisphere and right hemisphere. The midbrain and the hindbrain. The hindbrain contain of medulla, cerebrum, and pons.
Yeah, you're actually naming a lot of stuff that's not even on the image too, but yes, you're right. So our brain can be divided into our right and left hemispheres. We have these deeper structures that you can't really see right here, but we also do have our midbrain. So yes, good job. Raja, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I think the medulla oblongata is responsible for the awareness.
Okay. Rada, did you have anything you wanted to add? Or Anna Katerina?
No, I just want to tell you what's parts of the brain.
Sure, yeah, you can name one of the lobes if you want.
Okay, I know that we have cerebrum and cerebellum and medulla oblongata.
Yeah, so our cerebellum is what's in red right at the bottom there. That's right.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, Anna, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I want to talk about the lobe in the back. I forgot its name, but I know it's related with our vision. It's the part of the brain that processes all of our vision and etc. And also the cerebellum that he just talked about usually administrates our equilibrium. So it's about motor functions.
Yeah, exactly. So the you're right, the one at the back in green that processes our vision and actually is the home of the primary visual cortex is our occipital lobe, and then our cerebellum is in red. Okay, I'll move on to Gulshan. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, do you want to share?
Yes, I think lobes of the brain are the major identifiable zones of the human cerebral cortex. So it contains of the hemisphere of the cerebrum.
Yeah, our cerebrum is basically pretty much all of what you can see here. So that's right. Okay, I'll go to Arwa and then we'll move on.
You hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
The blue one is the frontal lobe, and the pink is the parietal lobe. The green is responsible for vision, and the yellow is for the hearing and the smell, hear and smell and taste. And there's a fifth one that can't be seen under the pink and the yellow one. Responsible for the memory, I think.
Yeah, that's our hippocampus. So it's responsible for encoding all of our memory. So good job. I'll reiterate for anyone that couldn't hear.
Can I add a tiny fact?
Sure.
The brainstem, which consists of medulla and pons and midbrain. So my friends are mentioned medulla and midbrain, but they are and pons, but they are all mean brainstem.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. So our green or kind of the bluish one up front is our frontal lobe. It's responsible for a lot of aspects of cognition, thinking, personality. We have in pink our parietal cortex, which is the home of our primary somatosensory cortex. So it essentially receives information about sensations involving touch. And then we have our primary auditory cortex, which is in our temporal lobe, which is in yellow. And then we already talked about our occipital lobe and then our cerebellum as well. So great job, everyone. And I'm also looking at the chat and it looks like everyone's got some good input there as well. So again, to reiterate, we have these 4 different lobes and they all do these really highly specialized things, but they're also communicating with one another. Okay, so now we've talked about the different lobes of the brain and what they do, but how does our brain function this way and how can it communicate and receive all this information? What makes that possible? Well, it's all thanks to the cells of the nervous system. So we have our neurons, which are these really excitable cells that transmit electrical signals and electrical information to other neurons. And then we also have glia. You can think of glia as our support cells. So they support neurons, they help keep them alive. they help make sure that they can send the information that they need, and they make sure that our neurons can do their job. So does anybody know, do we have more neurons in our brain or do we have more glia? Which type do we have more of? Malak?
I think neurons.
Okay, you think neurons. Does anyone else think differently? You see?
I guess the neurons because it's all over the body, and also it's responsible for transfer the electrical signals for all over the body and the electrical pulses from the brain to the receptors that to the effectors, not the receptors.
Okay, all right. Chidima, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I was actually going to also say neurons because it's the brain. You said the brain, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I'd say the neurons.
Okay, I'm gonna take one more answer and then we'll move on. So, sorry if I mispronounced your name, but Swan Mai?
I think it's the glia.
Yeah, okay, so great input, everybody. But we actually have between 5 to 10 times more glia than we do neurons. So we're born with a very fixed amount of neurons, and there is some capacity for new neurons to be generated, but we won't talk about that today. But we actually have more glia than we do neurons. They outnumber our neurons by a factor of 5 to 10 to 1. So we have approximately like 5 to 10 times as many glia as we do neurons. But again, I totally understand why people think we have more neurons. They seem more important. I'll put important in quotations because I think they're both important. But yes, so we'll talk about some of these cells in more depth. So we have our astrocytes. These are some of our glia cells. They look like these kind of spiny processes you see in the image there. And so they're very versatile. They are highly branched and they help form our blood-brain barrier. So our blood-brain barrier, which I'll talk about here, is made up of these really tightly packed endothelial cells that restrict what can come into the brain. So kind of think of a shield around our brain that is preventing essentially foreign substances from entering the brain. This is good because it helps protect our brain and we need our brain to function, but it can also be bad because when we're trying to deliver drugs to the brain or deliver treatments, the brain doesn't allow it. Essentially doesn't allow itself to be helped because this barrier is so tightly regulated. So how have scientists work around this if they're trying to deliver a treatment to the brain? Well, what they do is they use these really tiny small molecules that are hydrophobic to transport the drugs in. They're essentially trying to deliver things to the brain, but do it in a sneaky way so that the blood-brain barrier doesn't really know about it. We have some other cells in our nervous system that are also glia. So this is our second type of glia. They're these microglia, and they are also small and spiny. They're found in our central nervous system, and they act as phagocytes. We have our ependymal cells. These are our cells that line our cerebrospinal fluid, so they help make the cerebrospinal fluid that our brain and our spinal cord kind of float around in, and it's filled with nutrients, so it helps keep our brain healthy. And then we also have these two types of cells. So we have our oligodendrocytes and we have our Schwann cells. And so oligodendrocytes, they myelinate, and I'll talk about myelination in a second. So they myelinate axons in the what? Anyone want to say? Anyone want to share?
Yes.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, the CNS or central nervous system.
Yes. So our oligodendrocytes myelinate axons in the central nervous system. And then our Schwann cells, they myelinate axons in our peripheral nervous system. So I'll talk about myelination in a sec, but what is one really important property of neurons that I did mention briefly before that makes them unique to other cells in the body? Zukra, did you want to share?
But I think neurons are responsible for carrying information. It's really important, I think. And using electrical and chemical signals, they help coordinate all of the necessary functions of life. And in short, our nervous systems detect what is going on around us and inside us. They decide how we should act. alter the state of internal organs. For example, heart rate changes, for instance, and allows us to think about and remember what is going on.
Exactly, yeah. So that's one important thing about neurons that makes them unique. I'll take one more response. Amir?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
I think it's because it holds all the communication in our through the electrical cells, and they communicate between them, and they can because with the help of them we can know how we sense, and they help our sensations, etc.
Yeah, exactly. And so everyone's had some great input, and I've also been seeing some great input in the chat as well. So great job, everyone. Someone says that it's because the mature neurons don't divide, but it's true, they don't undergo mitosis. And someone says something about action potentials. So yes, that's what we're going to talk about now. So as you can see here, our neuron doesn't really look like the other cells that we have in the body. We have these dendrites over here, these little kind of spiny arms. And what these dendrites do is they receive information from other neurons. So they receive that information, then that information is processed and summated in our soma, so our cell body here. And then that information is propagated down this axon here where my cursor is, where it then ends up at this axon terminal. Okay, so that's kind of the basics of what our neuron anatomy is. You can see that we have this myelin, this kind of fatty substance that wraps around our neuron. And then we have our nucleus, which all of our cells have, or most of our cells have, not our red blood cells. And then we have some other cells that are helping myelinate it. We have our axon terminals where that information then gets released and sent out to another neuron or a muscle or an effector cell, etc. So I want to quickly talk about myelin before we talk about our resting membrane potential. So myelin, if you notice on the axon of our neuron, it's this fatty substance that kind of forms this insulating layer around our neurons. And the most important unique factor about a neuron is that it's electrically excitable and can communicate information via electrical signals. So what this myelin does to help a neuron propagate and send out these electrical signals is that it helps insulate the nerves. So by wrapping around the axon where this information has to travel down, where this positive charge has to propagate down, it preserves the charge and prevents it from leaking out into the extracellular environment. So it increases the speed at which conduction happens, and then it allows for the charge to essentially jump across all of these little spaces in between the myelin. So it makes this communication a lot faster. So the myelin really helps our neurons propagate and communicate much faster than they could without, because it's protecting that charge and making sure all that positive charge is staying inside, or as much as possible. So now going back to our resting membrane potential, I mentioned that our neurons are electrically excitable. That means that if they become depolarized enough or they receive enough positive charge, then they can generate this action potential that allows for the signal to travel across the neuron and then release these neurotransmitters at the end to then communicate with another neuron. So think of a neuron as being one messenger in a relay chain, and every time our neurons are excited, they are releasing information to pass on to the next neuron in that chain. So some factors that contribute to our resting membrane potential and make it negative is that there's a lot of potassium that the cell is permeable to. So a lot of potassium essentially just leaves the neuron at rest. So that means that the neuron is really negative inside. And it's good that it's really negative inside, because then when positive charge comes in, it allows it to be depolarized. We say depolarizing charges, but that just means that there's positive charge coming in that allows it to spike. So if you look at this graph here, this is what an action potential looks like. This is what the phase of an action potential actually looks like. So what you can see here is that our resting membrane potential is around negative 65 millivolts. So our neuron's at rest. It's not doing anything right now. It's kind of calm. And then we have these channels that open and allow different ions to come in, these positive ions to come in. And all this means is, I'll simplify this because I know some of you don't have a background in neuroscience, and we want to make sure that this is accessible to everyone. But essentially, all you need to know here is that our neuron's negative at rest, then these positive ions come in and it allows it to get excited. And when it gets excited, it can then transfer information to other neurons. So that's all you really need to know from here. And if you want to chat about action potentials in more detail later on, you can. And this is what it looks like at the end here. So if you look at the end of this neuron in yellow, it's kind of really close to the receiving center of the next neuron. So the way that neurons transmit information is they release these little neurotransmitters that bind to the dendrites of our next neuron. So if this seems a little bit complicated, to simplify it, essentially what these neurons are doing is they're just sending information by releasing these little molecules that bind and then can excite this next neuron. Then that next neuron can become excited, release its own neurotransmitters, etc. So what you can see here is that our nervous system has a lot of different ways of communicating with other neurons, and it's dependent on whether or not it becomes depolarized. So that's another really cool feature of our nervous system. So now we'll talk about what happens when things go wrong. So far I've been talking about essentially when things go right. So, our neuron is depolarized correctly. It's got myelin. It can send that information. It can become excitable. It can communicate to other neurons. But what happens when things go wrong? So I'll be talking about go ahead.
Quick question. Someone asked in the chat, the terminals of the neurons are called synapses, correct?
Yes. So this little junction that you see here, in between this axon terminal bouton and the dendrite of another neuron, is called the synapse. There are whole classes that you can take just focused on the synapse, what happens at the synapse, how neurons have different axon terminals, different shaped dendrites, etc. So there's a lot that you can learn from all of this. Okay, good question. So I'll be talking about a few psychiatric disorders, 2 that are more related to the neurobiology of disease, and then 2 neurodegenerative disorders. So 2 disorders of the nervous system that are more psychiatric are obsessive compulsive disorder, or OCD. And some of these symptoms include obsessions and compulsions. So worrying about getting sick from a contaminated object, repetitive motions. There are some potential causes linked with environments and genetics, but we don't have a complete cause figured out for this one as well. Sometimes traumatic events trigger the development of OCD or the severity of the symptoms, but this is more psychiatric. So this is dealing more with our mind-body connection. And then we also have major depressive disorder. So some causes are genetics, environmental factors, and another stress model. So some symptoms of major depressive disorder are feeling empty or sad for a long period of time, a loss of appetite, irritability, a lack of interest in usual activities. It's usually accompanied by other negative symptoms as well. And both treatments for OCD and major depressive disorder are essentially just to raise the level of a certain neurotransmitter in our brain that will help our neurons communicate better and lead to like happier feelings. So it'll help the patient have improved psychiatric symptoms. So even though this is a psychiatric disorder, it has connections to neurotransmitters, cognitive behavioral therapy, and etc. So everything's kind of related here. And now I'll talk about 2 disorders that are more characterized by the neurobiology of disease. So I'm not sure if you know of anyone that has multiple sclerosis or a spinal cord injury, but multiple sclerosis is essentially a chronic inflammatory condition. So you know how I was talking about how our neurons have this myelin, and this myelin is really important to our neurons because it protects the charge and helps them stay excitable and communicate this information. Well, in patients that have multiple sclerosis, their immune system actually attacks the myelin and breaks it down and eats away at it. So there's no myelin left. And then the neurons can't communicate with each other because when they try to send signals, the signals get lost because there's no myelin to help protect the charge. And this leads to lesioning and also gliosis. So glial cells come to the site of injury and they also essentially make it worse. Unfortunately, there aren't any cures like that we have found right now, but scientists are hopefully working on cures for multiple sclerosis. And interestingly, it's at the highest rate in Canada. So it has to do with your environment, how much sun exposure you have, and yeah. So our second disorder we'll be talking about is a spinal cord injury. So a spinal cord injury has a very clear cause. So the most common causes of spinal cord injury are motor vehicle accidents, so like car accidents, and also gun violence. So essentially what happens is a person will get into an accident or they potentially get shot or injured. And what happens to the spinal cord is it becomes compressed. So imagine your spinal cord gets squeezed. And this compression essentially kills the neurons that are there and leads to the neuron cell death, which can lead to your spinal cord not being able to send out information to your body, which is why sometimes in spinal cord injury patients you see like paralysis, so they can't send that information out to make their muscles move. So that's what there is. And there's also, unfortunately, not a cure for spinal cord injury as well, but we encourage people to, wear your seatbelt while you're driving. Don't drink and drive. Drive safely, so that way we can potentially try to reduce the rates of spinal cord injuries because they are pretty high right now. Now we'll talk about two other neurodegenerative diseases. So we have Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease. I'm sure that most of you have probably heard about Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease. You might even potentially have family members or friends with family members that have Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease. You usually don't see this until patients are between the ages of like 40 and 60, usually on the older end of that. But essentially what these neurodegenerative diseases are is we have these proteins that don't fold properly, and then they make these other proteins not fold properly as well, and then they just start building up, and they essentially lead to these neurons dying because they can't communicate properly with one another. And so this leads to problems concentrating, most notably in Alzheimer's, problems with remembering things. And there aren't any cures right now, but we do have some FDA-approved drugs to help alleviate the system. So it's a neurodegenerative disease because it leads to degeneration of our neurons. We also have Parkinson's disease, but this is a loss of a different kind of neuron. So it's a loss of these dopamine producing cells. You can research this on your own if you want to know what dopamine is, but it essentially leads to tremors in movement and muscle and motor rigidity, etc. And there's also not a cure right now, but there are some treatments that for patients to help alleviate some of their symptoms. So as you can see, these were only 6 conditions, and there are a ton more. So there are a lot of different conditions and disorders that affect the body because they affect the brain in different ways. So it's important that we have awareness and education about this to potentially find a cure someday. Okay, so we've talked about all these different diseases and disorders, but in order to know that Alzheimer's is potentially related to protein misfolding or that Parkinson's is the result of like dopamine loss in the brain, we have to know where that information is coming from. Scientists had to have conducted experiments to figure out what's going wrong in the brain. So I want to highlight the importance of research because scientific research fuels medicine. It fuels how doctors are able to make diagnoses, to understand why different diseases work the way that they do and affect the body the way that they do. So shout out to all of the researchers that are working to understand these diseases better so that we can help patients better. So here's one sample technique. So let's say you have a question in neuroscience and you want to figure out how muscle innervation works. You can use these techniques to answer your questions in neuroscience. And that's what research is. It's using these techniques or developing new techniques to answer the questions that you have. So some ones that we can use for neuroscience are extracellular recordings. Essentially, all this means is that you can record from muscle fibers and see what's innervating the muscle fibers, what makes the muscle fibers more positive or more negative. You can study the anatomy of a crayfish. And I took these pictures from a neuroscience lab that I did in my 3rd year of university, which is actually really cool. This is one thing that you can do. Another neuroscience technique that I haven't done myself personally is an fMRI, which is measuring the activity in your brain. So it's detecting these changes in blood flow and figuring out which areas of your brain are more active. So we talked about the different lobes earlier, talked about our frontal lobe, our occipital lobe, our parietal lobe. Sometimes researchers will have participants do different things and then see which areas of the brain are more active. And that's how we know now that our frontal lobe is associated with things like thinking and personality and how our different lobes have these different functions. So it's all because of these different really cool science techniques that this is all possible. We have an MRI, which just shows us the structure of the organs. So the way that we know what our brain looks like and what it looks like inside of our head is because of techniques like this that allow us to create these really detailed images of the brain without actually being invasive and looking at the brain physically. And MRIs are used on other organs in the body as well. We also have a CT scan, which doctors sometimes use to diagnose brain tumors and also check for internal injuries. So you can see the tumors and they would pop up on the scan over here. And then here's a list of a bunch of other research techniques that you can use, not just in neuroscience, but all of these have been included here for neuroscience. So there's a homework assignment that you can do. It's optional. As I mentioned here, you do not have to do it. It's not required. But if you want to do some background research on the techniques that I've talked about and design a simple experiment to solve this question, a neuroscientist collects brain tissue from a mouse model of Alzheimer's disease and wants to discover which specific proteins may be involved in neurodegeneration. How can they do this? You can write up a response to this and do some research and then message me on Slack if you want to complete this assignment. And then I'll give you some feedback on it. And our most thorough response will get a shout out at the beginning of either our Wednesday session or the Friday one, depending on how many responses I get. But it's a good way for you to test your science investigative skills to get some feedback on how you're designing this experiment. And it's just a fun opportunity. Again, it's not required, so you don't have to do it if you don't want to. But yeah. Okay, so if you think the brain is cool, if you find neuroscience exciting and you want a way to get involved with it in high school, I have some really good news for you. You can participate in Brain Bee. So Brain Bee is this neuroscience competition specifically for high schoolers that's hosted either in like February or March or April. It's open to all high school students. You don't have to have any prior experience in neuroscience. You just have to study. And it's really an amazing experience. I did it in high school, and then I helped coordinate a team of volunteers at my university this year because I went to a university that hosted Brain Bee, and it was a really awesome experience. It's free, and HS means high school. So all high school students can participate in it across the globe. It's not just an American or a Canadian thing. It happens all over the globe. And high school students compete in it every single year. It's an amazing opportunity. I would highly recommend it if you're even a little bit interested in neuroscience and you want to give it a go. So I go to school in Canada, and this was the team of volunteers that I coordinated at my university this year. If you look at the top two panels, that's some of the volunteers that we had. I had a really, really great team of volunteers helping me coordinate Brain View, helping me coordinate speakers and activities for the students. And then if you look at the bottom right-hand panel, those were all the students that came to a university to participate in the Brain Bee. So high school students like you that are really interested in neuroscience and want to compete. And it was honestly a really, really good experience. The high school students had a nice time. Even if they didn't place in the top 3, they got to do neuroscience demonstrations. They got to learn from professors. It was just a one-day commitment. And it was a really good experience, and I had a lot of fun participating in it in high school and then kind of full circle moment helping coordinate it in university. So how do you participate if you want to get involved with this? It's available in every state and country. So all you have to do is type in Brain Bee. Let's say you live in Egypt, you can type in Brain Bee Egypt. You can type in Brain Bee USA. If you live in a state in the USA, you should type in, like Brain Bee California or Brain Bee Massachusetts or something. And then register when registration is available. You can also make a club at your school or gather a group of students and you can all study together. They post this information online, and typically you just have to study from a couple different books. So you want to know those books inside and out, study these patient diagnoses, and then, take the time over 2 to 3 months, and then you can participate. Okay, I'm gonna look and see if I have any questions about Brain Bee in the chat. Let's see. Can you enter if you're not an American? Yes. And is it online? It's most of the time it's in person, but I know during COVID they had it online in some places. Yeah, so this is a competition for neuroscience. So if you're interested, you're more than welcome to.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, go for it.
Is it a test or research or competition or what's the method?
Yeah, it's kind of like a test. So you do a written test where I come from. You do a written test about neuroscience. They ask you different questions about the brain and different disorders. And then the top 10 students that do the best on the test get to compete in this round where they answer questions and you write the answer on a whiteboard. And then they figure out the top 3 from there. So it's interactive, but it's also kind of like just a test on its own. And then we have a Brain Bee channel on Slack. So if you have any questions about Brain Bee or you need any guidance, I'm there to help answer your questions. So you can join that channel and I'll link it. And I'll be happy to answer any and all questions that you have for Brain Bee. The deadlines have definitely not ended yet because Brain Bee will not be happening now until next year, so 2025. So yeah. And then this is an individual competition. So you compete by yourself. Okay, I'll take 2 questions. Yeah.
I think I got a question that what was your initial spark in wanting to study neuroscience?
Yeah, so I have basically always known that I've wanted to go into neuroscience. I watched this documentary when I was like 8 years old on Nova, which is this educational channel. And it was all about how our brain works. And it talked about how our mirror neurons work and how we perceive the world around us. And I just thought the brain was so cool for doing all of that. And so basically from that point on, I was like, yep, this is what I want to do. And then I ended up picking a university based on which ones had a stronger neuroscience program, and I have no regrets. But yes, I think the brain is really cool, and it's awesome that that some universities offer majors of programs in neuroscience, just dedicated to the science of the nervous system and of the brain and your spinal cord.
Hi, Davina. Can I ask you a small question, please?
Sure.
Actually, I'm interested in BCI, or known as brain-computer interface. Did you have experience in this field, please?
Yeah, I don't think I have any experience with that kind of interfacing, unfortunately. But if you post a message on Slack, maybe some other people have experience with that, and then we can.
Hi, can I ask a question?
Yes.
Okay, so I wanted to ask something about Brain Bee. So I don't know if it's an international or a national competition, so I wanted to ask for this.
Yeah, so they offer national competition, and then if you win the national competition, you can go international.
I want.
Okay. Sorry, I think their Wi-Fi was a little shaky. And then I'll take a question from Hannah, and then we'll move on.
I was wondering the slide about the fMRI. Can you get it back? I have a question there.
Yeah, we can go back. Let me see here.
Yes, I want to know what are the red spots and what do they refer to?
Yeah, so the red spots are the areas of higher activity. So those are the parts of the brain that are more active than the other ones at the time of the scan.
Like maybe they have tumors, the red spots, or it's just
No, just activity, yeah.
So what is the type of test that we know if there is a tumor in the brain or any something?
You can do a CT scan, which takes just one solid single image of different parts of the brain. And then you look at the CT scan, and then you might see discolored spots or darker spots, and those might indicate it too.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, so I'll go on to after our Brain Bee. And then I wanted to finish up today with some optical illusions and why they work. So I'm not sure if any of you have seen optical illusions before, but essentially the reasons that we fall for them are because our brain wants to assume that the world is easy to understand and sometimes takes what we call the path of least resistance. So it essentially just assumes the world makes sense, and then if it processes information, it goes, yeah, that's probably what it's supposed to be. So if you look at these two images here, the one on the left and the one on the right, both faces look kind of like normal upside down faces, right? Hopefully you agree that they look like normal upside down faces. You can put in the chat if they both look like normal faces to you.
There's some difference.
Yeah, there's some difference, but for the most part, they look like normal faces, right? There's not anything that looks like crazy about it. But yeah, when you flip
At
it,
first, I think they are the same. Then it appears in the right one is different, and the eyes aren't noticeable when they are turned.
yeah, exactly. So it actually turns out that the one on the right has upside down eyes and upside down mouth, and like the features are essentially flipped. But when you look at it in the other image, it doesn't look as bad as it does here. It still looks kind of normal. But when you look at it like this, you would never think that the face on the right was the same face as the one on the left, right? So it's another example of our brain just taking the information that we have here and assuming that. It probably makes sense. If you look at this image here, it's an image, not a video. So what you're looking at here is just one picture. But what do you notice about it? If you look at it, and you don't have to look at it for too long if you get dizzy. What do you notice about this picture here? Do you know?
Like it's moving, like it's a video.
Yeah, it looks like a video, right? Because it's moving, but it's actually not moving at all. It's just one picture. That's another way of kind of tricking our brains into thinking that it's moving when it's actually not moving. If you look at this image right here, it kind of looks like a piece of like a vase or something. But if you look at it differently, it actually looks like two faces here. So it's another way of kind of tricking our brains into either seeing one thing or the other. If you look at this picture here, which always trips me up, is that there's actually no shadow. You see a shadow here, but it doesn't actually exist. This shade of gray here is the same shade of gray as the one in this light corner over there. So all of the gray stuff is actually all the same. And you're wondering, like, how is this possible? Good question. We still don't know. All we know is that it tricks us pretty well into thinking that there is a shadow here when there actually is not a shadow. You can watch a video on this as well, where they kind of essentially break up all the color tiles, and you can see for yourself that they're actually all the same shade of gray. Okay, and then I wanted to end off with this dress. So this dress was pretty popular a couple years ago. Some people said that they saw a blue and black dress. I personally see a white and gold dress, but you can type in the chat and let me know what colors you see. Okay, some people see white and gold. Some people see blue and black. Yeah, but I very clearly see white and gold. Yes, we're all looking at the same thing, but we're perceiving it differently, which is another way that our brain is so cool that we're looking at the same thing, but we process it a little bit differently. And we still don't really completely know how this optical illusion works, but it did cause a lot of uproar 4 years ago when it was super popular. So just another way to kind of show how our brains perceive the world differently, even when we're looking at the same thing. Okay, so that's all I have for my neuroscience workshop today. I wanted to conclude by saying thank you to your brain. Hopefully you learned a little bit more about what your brain does for you and all the different things it's involved in and how it works and all the intricacies of it. It's doing a ton for you. So, say thank you to your brain. It's keeping you here. Okay, so we're almost at the end. So Ahmad, do you have the second attendance poll?
Yes, I do. I'll launch it now.
Awesome. Okay. And then while everyone's doing the session, if you have questions, from the workshop today, feel free to put them in the chat or raise your hand, and I'd be happy to answer them for you. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed the neuroscience workshop. I really loved teaching it. I hope you learned a little bit more about the brain, that got a little bit excited about it, thought it was kind of cool. And yeah, hopefully you got something out of it. Okay. Mayar, did
Thank
you
you,
have a question?
Davina, for your session. It was amazing. Have a nice evening.
Thank you.
Wait, day. I'm so sorry. In my place, it's evening, so I'm wishing you evening. So have a nice day.
Thanks, you too.
Bye.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
I'm talking about Brain B. I'm from Egypt and I want to apply for this competition. I can do it, right?
You can do it. Yeah, I think there is a brain bee in Egypt.
Okay. Can you send the presentation in Arabic?
Yeah, of course.
Thank
then,
you.
Noor, I think you have your hand up.
Yeah, yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. I'm a bit confused about the nervous system anatomy.
Okay. Is there anything I can clarify for you?
I'm confused about the whole topic.
Okay, so what makes sense to you? Do you understand the different lobes of the brain? Do you get confused on what the neurons themselves look like?
I understand the different lobes of the brain, but there was a specific part which I couldn't understand.
I'll go back.
Okay.
Was it one of these?
No, for a bit. Okay, so first I can't understand the potential. What was it called? There was
Oh, the action potentials. So
Yeah.
think of it, it's not exactly like this, but imagine you receive like an electric shock and that kind of jolts your skin, right? Like if someone were to shock you. So that's kind of like what our neurons are doing. If they're receiving this like burst of electricity that they're generating, and because they receive that electricity, it allows them to generate enough power to send a message out, to move a signal down a neuron and communicate with another one. So it's kind of like, getting a shock, and then because it gets the shock, it can move along.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Malak, did you have a question?
Yes, I have a question in this topic also. I'm confused between the dendrites. Do the dendrites receive signals from the PNS or the CNS? And the axons, do they receive the signals or give the signals from the CNS or the PNS?
Yeah, so our dendrites are receiving this information. So they might receive this information from the brain because, different neurons in the brain are talking to one another. But then we also have these sensory receptors that send information to our neurons so that they can, tell us that I touched something hot or I touched something cold or something like that. So you have different neurons everywhere, but it's receiving information mostly to transmit it and do something with the information later on in both areas.
It's transmitted by the axon?
Yeah, it propagates down this axon and then it can get released and share information with another neuron. Yeah. Raywan?
Hello.
I wanted to,
Yeah, Raywan, go ahead.
okay, I wanted to ask about something about the medical debate. When I participated in the national session. So how am I supposed to know the results of it? Should I just attend the national session or it's going to be announced on Slack?
Yeah, so for our national session, it'll be announced at 5 p.m. Or if you want to just look at the slides that we post afterward, if you don't want to stay up for that, then you can. But it'll be in the slideshow that we upload.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Mayar?
Yeah, I want to thank you so much for this awesome presentation. I really got benefit from you. And the question I want to ask is about the multiple sclerosis. That made me a little bit confused. So, what makes the white blood cells attack the myelin while the brain really knows that will be very bad for the whole body?
Yeah. So there are other conditions, they're called autoimmune conditions, where your immune system, for a reason that we don't understand, attacks itself. So your body is essentially attacking itself. Some people have hypothesized that maybe there's a protein related to a virus that's similar on myelin as it is to the virus. So your immune system mistakes your myelin for the virus and starts attacking it without realizing that it's not the virus. So that's one hypothesis. So for example, I'm not sure if any of you have ever had mono, the like contractible disease that you can get if you it comes around like mid-November or so, like that's when it usually spikes. But the mononucleosis protein is pretty similar to this protein that we have on myelin. So after you get mono, your immune system, it creates all these B and T cells to defeat the virus essentially. But then afterwards, it thinks that your myelin is the virus as well. So then it starts attacking it, even when that's not true. So it's just very unfortunate.
Yeah, I got it. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Jana?
Yes, I want
Okay.
to ask a question.
Yep, go for it.
How couldn't we see in the last picture um, the same colors for the dress? Some of us said it's white and gold, and the others said it's black and blue. How does it going?
Yeah,
How's
so
it?
it's a good question. Honestly, we're not sure. It has to do with differences in perception. Some people just see things differently, and it's because their brains are wired or created a little bit differently and they process information differently. Maybe they have neurons that are connected in different ways, or they experience something that made them perceive different colors. But that's kind of the beauty of the illusion. We don't specifically know why, we just know that it's different, and then we can explore that later.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Dina?
Yeah, I want to ask you, are you going to do anything else or just
Yeah, no, you're all set. You can go.
Yeah, thank you so much. Okay, bye. Have a good
Bye.
evening.
Thanks. Chidima?
So hi, thanks for the presentation. My question is actually about the lobes of the brain. Can you like say it one more time? Because every time I think I know what's a particular lobe, what the function of a lobe is, I think I mix it up. It's always just so mixed up.
Okay, so on this slide here, our frontal lobe is this one in purple. It's at the front. So it has our primary motor cortex. It has so like all of our voluntary muscle functions, higher cognitive skills, thinking, personality. So that's this purple one here. Then we have our parietal lobe. That's the one in yellow. So that's where we have sensation, taste. And then we have our temporal lobe, which is this one in pink here. So it's got some visual information, but mostly auditory information that's being processed here. And then we have our occipital lobe in blue at the back. So that's our visual cortex. And then we have our cerebellum at the bottom.
Okay, that's nice. And please, one more question.
Yeah.
Okay, it's like so you said about the illusion that's the one of the clothes that you can see different colors based on our brains work differently, right?
Yep.
So then, not to sound like sci-fi, but you do brain transplants. Can you do brain transplants and that could like affect anything or anything like that?
I don't think anyone's ever done a brain transplant in people successfully, just because that would, potentially be really dangerous and has a high likelihood of not working. But in theory, if you switched brains with someone, you might see it differently because you have a different brain.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah. Hannah?
My question is about the immune disorder that you talked about.
Mm-hmm.
how do you know that a person had this disease? Because one of my friends, like, she told me that her immune is working very bad and it's affecting all her body, like her joints and her muscles. Is this related to the disorder that you talked about?
Yes, that's a really good question. Do you mind repeating that last part just because I think you cut out?
Which part exactly?
Um, I think I heard your first question, but just like I think the last sentence or two.
I'm saying the pain in joints or in muscles, or is this related to the disorder in the immune system? Because she's really taking vitamins and normal medications, but I feel that the problem is much larger. She has dizziness. She can't stand much long, and she's very tired. I want to know more about the disorder.
Yeah. So I would say that being tired all the time and being really dizzy and having pain are potentially indicators of like a nervous system disease or some damage to the nervous system. I'm not a doctor, of course, so I'm not saying any of this conclusively. But if you're able to see a neurologist, I would highly recommend that because they can perform some exams. But for the immune conditions that I was talking about, so multiple sclerosis, patients often realize that they have it because they get super dizzy. They find that half their face is like drooping because their muscles have stopped working, because their nerves have stopped working to send messages to the muscles to tell them to contract. You get numbness and tingling, and so patients experience all of these symptoms and they start to get worse. So then they go to their doctor and then they figure it out. But yeah, you usually don't realize it beforehand. Usually comes after the onset of the symptoms.
Yeah, she got many tests, and it's mixed up between immune system and like pains in the muscles or like bones. It's mixed up really. We don't know the real cause. She went to many doctors, but it's very confusing.
Yeah, I understand and empathize with that too, because it's probably difficult to receive a lot of different information from doctors when you would hope that they would just be able to tell you what's wrong in one go. But yes, hopefully, um, you'll be able to find a doctor that will give you kind of a more better, clear diagnosis of it as well.
Okay, thank you for your time.
Yeah. Sama?
Hello.
Hi.
How can I improve the biology study because the grade is very bad?
I would say for biology, spend time making flashcards or just figuring out how you study best. When I was in high school, I used to study for tests by bringing my textbooks out into the kitchen while my mom would like cook dinner or something, and I would try to teach her the concepts. If I couldn't teach her the concepts, it means I didn't know it well enough in my head to be tested on it. So then I would go back and I would study it, and I would study it to a point where I felt comfortable teaching it. I always like to say if you can teach something comfortably, it means you understand it pretty well. So try doing that. And then something else that I always recommend is doing as much practice as you possibly can. So doing practice problems, making flowcharts, quizzing yourself, creating quizzes for yourself, etc.
Okay, thanks for you.
Yeah, no problem. Okay. I saw that someone else said in the chat, they asked me if I'm a nurse. No, I am unfortunately not as cool as all the nurses I know are. I just graduated from university with my bachelor's in science. So I just did a 4-year undergrad program, but I'm not a nurse. And then for more information on BrainBee, I'll be posting more about that later on Slack. So if you have questions about that, feel free to let me know and I'll put more information there as well. Okay. So if you have